Hey, what's up, y'all? Welcome back with Eric, and yeah, you're gonna be watching me learn how to program today. Today I'm gonna be learning a little bit about object-oriented programming, right? Pretty much just something to help me on my journey to become a full stack Python developer. Just trying to really just pick up my skills as fast as possible. So this is video one of me understanding class and object. I found this dude on YouTube is a really excellent teacher because what I found is like programming for some weird reason. I don't get it and I don't understand it. When people are trying to teach you programming, they like, yeah, first of all, what we're going to do is we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do this, and we're done. I'm like, well, wait a second. You didn't tell me what this means. I don't understand it. How am I supposed to, what is that like? What can you compare that to? Could you break it down for me? And sadly, they don't. But this guy's pretty good at explaining. Build with Python. He's pretty good. Got something in my eye. So without further ado, before I play it, I got my notepad right here, and I'm gonna be writing some stuff down, kind of commentating on some stuff, and pretty much how I learn is I try to like take notes because when you can explain things in a simple term, and you're teaching it, you can explain it. That means you pretty much get it, and you can, crystallize your thoughts and allow you to be able to remember it, which allows you to be a better Python developer, which allows you to make more money, and that's what we want. Desperately, it's more money. All right, so without further ado, play.
Alright guys, welcome to this object-oriented programming using Python video. And a lot of people on YouTube and in other videos make things a lot complex. And object-oriented programming is not that complex if you understand the basics and very simple concepts in object-oriented programming. So that is my aim with this video, to explain everything in very simple terms so that you can make complex programs after understanding the base structure of classes and objects and object programming as a whole. So let's get started with this video by understanding what exactly is object-oriented programming. So what I want you to do is forget everything you know about coding and go back to your high school. In high school, you had this geometry box, right? And in that geometry box, you had all these cool stuff like pencils, sharpeners, scales, protractors, and compass. So inside that geometry box were these things that you would use to basically create something. So all these things inside that geometry box are actually objects. And that geometry box itself is a class. So that geometry box contains a class of objects, and the geometry box is a class, and the objects inside that thing, or the things inside that geometry box, are actually objects. And when we use those objects to create something on paper, then it is known as object-oriented creation. And similarly in programming, when we use objects and classes to create something, it is known as object-oriented programming. Alright, so that was pretty simple. So let's give you another example to make sure that you properly understand this concept of classes and objects. So imagine there are a lot of animals in this world, right? I can't say about the universe because we don't know about the aliens, but at least on this earth we have a lot of animals. And for example, sharks, deer, lions, tigers. So all these animals are actually a class of animals, and these animals like sharks, deer, lions are actually objects. So whenever we talk about a group of things, then that group is actually a class and those things are objects. So in this example, the group is animals, and all the things inside the group like shark, deer, and tiger are actually things that are known as objects. So to give you a final example which we are actually going to be coding is that of students. So for example, forget everything that you know about classes and objects that I have told you till now, and imagine again that you are in high school, and that high school is a class of students, right? So what we are going to do is we are going to implement the same functionality of high school inside a code. So we are going to be creating a class of students, all right, and then every student inside that class.
All right, so let me pause the video right now. Let me tell you something, all right? Let me turn this right here on. Unfortunately, I'm not trying to be racist. A lot of these guys are not from America. It's kind of hard to understand these guys sometimes, right? So I turned the little writing stuff down there on so I can understand what it's saying. So far what I got people learning from this is that, okay, so when we start talking about object-oriented programming, it's made up of classes, it is made up of objects. when you look at things as a whole, that's the actual class. And with under each class, like subcategories, you got objects that make up that class. And then now what he's doing is he's saying, all right, listen, let's look at an actual school. Because within school, you got students and actual, learning rooms, classrooms. You actually got like subjects you take up. All right, so let's play.
Had a property, right? For example, they must have a first name, they must have a last name, and they must have some kind of an email also. So what we are going to do is we are just going to create something known as initialization function or an initialization method. So we are just going to write init, and now we are going to write the properties of every student. So every student in a class must have a first name that we are going to represent by F name, and then every student must have a last name, and then every student we are assuming must also have an email ID. Now what exactly is this init over here? So this init is a method or a constructor. So what exactly is a method, and what is the difference between the method and a function? So you can assume, kind of say that method and functions are the same thing, but the main difference between them and the superficial difference between them is whenever we use objects inside a code, then the function are basically known as methods, and when we don't use objects and classes, then they are just known as functions. So it's a little bit of a superficial definition, but for our purposes it's fine. And then this init is actually just it's a kind of a special method inside classes and inside Python that we use to initialize the properties of our class. So in our case, the class is students, and the properties of each student is first name, last name, and email. And what is this self over here? So this self represents the student that we are talking about. So let's say my name is Aric, and if we refer to me and inside this class, then this self will actually become Aric. But let's say there is another student in our class, and that student name is Johnny. And if we are talking about that Johnny student, then this self actually turns into Johnny. So in the case, whatever person we are talking about, or whatever student we are talking about in reference to, this self actually changes its purpose and its value. Now, how do we actually initialize these three variables inside our class? That's pretty simple. We just write self.
All right, so let me stop again. So, okay, so from that point, pretty much what I'm getting here at this point, when he wrote the init function, or he called it the method, init method, he said is a method or construction, and what it does, it initializes the properties of our class. Our class is called students, and then we have properties, first name, last name, email. It's initializing. All right, I don't really quite know what he mean by initialize it, but I'm just take that and run with it for right now. I'm gonna wait so I can understand. I can't understand right now. I'm gonna wait on it. So now he said, whenever we want to talk about methods and functions, people kind of sometimes use interchangeably. So whenever, he said it's called a method whenever we're using it inside of like object-oriented code. If we're not using class as an object, it's referred to as a function. He was saying some kind of like superficial understanding. I do. Damn. Play.
Dot first name equals to F name, and then we do the same thing with the last name and the email. Now obviously these are the variables that are inside students, and these are the variables that we are getting from our when we create an object, then these variables will be passed inside the class. So when we are
let me go back. What he said about
creating
self?
Objects, which you will see in a second, that we don't use objects and classes, then they are just known as functions. So it's a little bit of a superficial definition, but for our purposes it's fine. And then this init is actually just it's a kind of a special method inside classes and inside Python that we use to initialize the properties of our class. So in our case, the class is students, and the properties of each student is first name, last name, and email. And what is this self over here? So this self represents the student that we are talking about. So let's say my name is Aric, and if we refer to me and inside this class, then this self will actually become Aric. But let's say there is another student in our class, and that student name is Johnny. And if we are talking about that Johnny student, then this self actually turns into Johnny. So in the case, whatever person we are talking about, or whatever student we are talking about in reference to, this self actually changes its purpose and its value. Now, how do we actually initialize these three variables inside?
All right, so let me pause it one more again. All right, so when he said self, he was saying that it's in this situation, we're talking about a class of a student. So he's referring to it as which each student we're talking about. And I watched this video a little ahead, so I understand when he get down within actual class, he's going to call, like he's going to say, all right, I want like a first name, but he's going to say self dot first name. So that's like, referring to the actual student he's talking about. Like say if we have like 10 students and he says self dot blank and he's referring to Ricky. Well, that self is Ricky. If we're referring to another student named Samantha, then that self turns into Samantha. That's so far what I understand about it. All right, let's keep playing.
Class, that's pretty simple. We just write self dot first name equals to f name, and then we do the same thing with the last name and the email. Now obviously these are the variables that are inside students, and these are the variables that we are getting from our when we create an object, then these variables will be passed inside the class. So when we are creating objects, which you will see in a second, that these will contain the name, the last name and the email, and then these will get stored inside these variables. So these variables can be named as anything. We can even call it fn, but just a lot of coders just like to name these and these the same. So I'm just call it f name. Now that we have created a class and we have given some properties to that class and to each and every student, how do we actually add students inside a class? So imagine that your high school class is totally empty right now and you want to add the student one by one to that class. How do you do that? To do that, you can create a student variable. You can just call it stu1 for student1, and then you call.
All right, so I'm about to go back because I don't understand what he just said at all. So, yeah.
About, or whatever student we are talking about in reference to, this self actually changes its purpose and its value. Now, how do we actually initialize these three variables inside our class? That's pretty simple. We just write self dot first name equals to f name, and then we do the same thing with the last name and the email. Now obviously these are the variables that are inside students, and these are the variables that we are getting from our when we create an object, then these variables will be passed inside the class. So when we are creating objects, which you will see in a second, that these will contain the name, the last name and the email, and then these will get stored inside these variables. So these variables can be named as anything. We can even call it fn, but just a lot of coders just like to name these and these the same. So I'm just call it f name. Now that we have created a class and we have given some properties to that class and to each and every student, how do we actually add students inside a class?
Okay, I don't really understand quite what he's saying from this point. I think he's saying that the self dot f name equals the f name. I think he's saying this f name right here is the same as the f name that's actually in the what is it called? It's called a method because we're using inside of a class. So the init method that contains self, f name, last name, email. I think he's saying that the f name is the same that like over here, because he said we can change this. But then that doesn't make sense. I don't know, let's keep going. Let's see if we understand it down the road. We can always come back.
So imagine that your high school class is totally empty right now and you want to add the student one by one to that class. How do you do that? To do that, you can create a student variable. You can just call it stu1 for student1, and then you call this class by writing students, and inside that you provide the value of these three variables. So I'm just going to write the first name as my name, Athreya, and the last name as Bhatt, and then the email ID, I'm just going to call it athreya01@gmail.com. Now, how do you retrieve these values? So first of all, what happens when you write this and what happens when this line gets executed? So when it sees that the student's class or the student calling is over here, it goes over here to the student class, and then it takes all these three values and stores it inside these three variables, and then it initializes all three variables and stores them inside this f name, l name, and email. And how do we retrieve these values? The retrieval process is pretty simple. You can just write stu1 dot, let's say we want the email, so I can just write email over. Calling is over here, it goes over part, and then the email ID, I'm just going to call it athreya01@gmail.com. Now, how do you retrieve these values? So first of all, what happens when you write this, and what happens when this line gets executed? So when it sees that the student's class or the student calling is over here, it goes over here to the student class, and then it takes all these three values and stores it inside these three variables, and then it initializes all three variables and stores them inside this f name, l name, and email. And how do we retrieve these values? The retrieval process is pretty simple. You can just write stu1 dot, let's say we want the email, so I can just write email over here, and let's actually print it out and see how it looks. So I'm just going to print it out by writing this, and let's actually execute this main function. So as you can see, it has printed out the email over here, that is athreya01@gmail.com. Now let's actually also print out the last name. So for that, it's pretty easy. Instead of the email, we are just going to write l name and L name over here and click on play, and you'll be able to see that we have printed out the last name. Now what if we change the L name to just LN over here? Then as you can see, there is an error over here which says unresolved attribute. Then also over here we'll have to change it to LN and then click on play, and you'll be able to see that the last name and the email is printed properly. So let's actually change it to L name again.
All right, so here's where I'm a little confused right here. All right, I'm a little confused. So I get how he is setting this stu1 as a variable equals to students, and that's referring to the class of students. So now what's happening? Now what's happening is he putting in these, some data into the class, actual student, name, last name, emails, putting records into the class, right, arbitrarily. And then, like, down here, it seems like if he said print stul dot email, it seems like if he's setting, oh, I get it. Dab for understanding. Oh, right. So basically, right. All right. So check this out. Whenever, like, say for example, let me pull up something. All right. Let me pull up on you, bro. Let me pull up on you real quick. Let me show y'all something real quick, right? So whenever I'm writing Python code, all right, if I'm like this, if I'm like, all right, let's say if I'm saying, okay, let me say Johnny equals student. Okay. And then I want to say print. I can say student. If I print, like, I know there's not, I don't think this, like, the syntax is right, but just understand what I'm trying to say. Like, if I print student, this is going to print Johnny because this variable, or maybe I should have switched on the other side. Student is equal to Johnny. All right. So if I go, okay, student equals Johnny, right? Student means Johnny is equal to Johnny. So, like, let's say if it's in a container, I open a container called student, I put Johnny in there, and then I call the container with a print statement. It's going to print out, the outcome of that is going to be like Johnny, right? So I get what he's saying here, all right? Because it's like, all right, so if these values are going to the class, and then it seems like, couldn't he just say print F name, and then that'll come right here, and that'll be that name, which is like bat. However, because this variable F name is inside of this class, it becomes a class variable. You have to reference the class, but he's not referencing the class. He's referencing stl.email. Interesting. But I basically get what's going on. He has to say something dot email or something dot first name because he's using like classes, and like this right here is actually referencing students. So let's keep going and see if we understand. Let's keep going because this guy right here, built with Python, dude's awesome teacher, man. Go to his YouTube channel and subscribe to that joint. You'll learn.
Again. And let's create more than one object. So right now there is only one student inside our class. So let's actually add one more student inside our class. I'm just gonna copy and paste it over here. Call it the student2, and let's call him Johnny. And just like we do in all our videos, we use weird names. So I'm just gonna write Johnny Sins over here, and I don't know his email, but I'm just gonna assume it's something like johnnysins@gmail.com. And this will make sure that the second student is now added inside our class. And how do we print last name? Let's call it student2.lastname, and let's actually print it out and see if it works. And as you can see, the last name is printed over here. Now before we go further into this video, I want to make sure that you guys understand what are the objects and what are the instances in
this is why he's a great teacher. See what he's doing?
Our scenario. So we have added two students inside a class of students. So both of these students, that is the student1 and the student2, are actually instances of the class of students.
Okay, pause.
And each of these...
Perfect example. I'm not racist, but he clearly didn't say instances. So you'd be like, okay, what? But because I got the closed caption on, you see he's saying instances. All right.
Instances when they're actually instances of the class of students. And each of these instances, when they are tagged as a group, then these are known as objects. So if we say that student1 and student2 are going to school, then we say basically student1 and student2 objects are going to school. But if we just talk about student1 as an individual, then we say basically student1 instance is going to school. So these kind of object and instances are interusable, but there's a very thin line between both of them. So don't worry about them too much. You can call them instance or as an object. They're kind of interchangeable. All right. So now what I want to do is actually create.
So I get what you just said, but I don't really think it matters that much in the real world. As long as you get the freaking application working, hey, it's an object. Hey, it's an instance. But basically, what the guy is saying, that when you have a class of students, and then within inside that class of students, you actually have a group of students. Whenever you group something, it's a class, but it's talking about objects, and then you actually go and actually break those objects down and start talking about instances. And yeah, let's keep playing.
Inside a class. So a lot of people don't know that we can also create functions inside a class of students. So what if we want to print out the full name of our students?
Right, so let me just take a second right here and look at the syntax. Let me get this
inside the class. So let's actually.
All right, so basically, understand classes and objects. We're looking at this syntax right here. We understand the syntax of a class, and then you go and actually write a function down, or what is it? No, wait, it is method. You go actually write a method down, and the name of this method is in it, and then you actually go and you define the fields that you want to do, which is like a blueprint. Like say for example, this student class is going to contain first name, last name, and email. Students' actual first names, last names, and emails are not in there right at that moment, but you're just defining it. It's like a placeholder value, which those are. It's the makings up of a class, and then he went down and said self dot f name is equal to f name, and then below that, he's saying that these are the actual objects because the objects actually make up the class. So student 1, student 2, these are objects. And Johnny sends a Gmail. Or Altura, I think is the name he's using. Altura01 at Gmail. These are actual objects. So object-oriented programming is like, it's like we're passing objects in classes, which I'm pretty sure allow us to do something in the future with those objects. We can kind of refer to them. All right, so let's keep going.
Actually remove this from over here, and to print out the full name of the students inside the class, what we have to do is we first have to write student 1, and then we have to print out the first name, and then let's give a space a little bit, and then we have to print out its last name by writing stu1.lname. And then let's say we have to print out the full name of the second student, so we will have to copy and paste this again over here, and instead of stu1 we can call it stu2. And then we can run this code over here, and as you can see that the full name of both the objects or instances is printed over here. So what we are going to do is, instead of creating them one by one, so the whole idea of object-oriented programming is that the code should be reusable. And if there are, for example, hundreds of students in a class, we can't just print out their full names one by one. We have to make sure that we can just create a function inside a class and just print out the name very, very quickly. So what we are going to do is we are just going to create another a function or a method, in our case a method inside the students class, and we are going to call it full name. So let's call it full name, and then inside this method what we are going to do is we are just going to write print, and then we can just write over here print self dot fname, and then we're just going to give it a little bit of space over here, and then just print out self dot lname. And instead of writing all of this stuff, now what we can do is we can just write stu1 dot full name, and that's pretty much it. It's going to print out the full name.
All right, so I understand what he's doing. So it's a little thing they use in coding, and it's called dry. All right, it's called dry. Don't repeat yourself. All right, so don't repeat yourself. So I think that's what he's doing. Instead of doing that, referring to it one by one, he's writing an actual function, and the function is called full name. And then within this function, what is this function is going to do whenever you call it? It's going to take the first name and it's going to concatenate it with the actual last name so you can call them. So whenever you want to do that, you can just say, you can actually call the function. Now, normally when you call a function, you would call a function like this, right? If you're saying full name, right? Normally you would call a function like, full name, bim. I call it, but because this is inside of a class, it is a method. So you have to write normally the class name dot full name, but he's writing stu1 dot full name. So I'm going to act like I understand what I was talking about. Basically, it's inside of a class. So, Python gets it. So, okay. So he's calling that function that's inside of this class of students. Okay. So whenever you call it, it's going to take the first name, is going to concatenate with the last name, but then I think he's going to actually pass something through here, which is an object, I think, or instance. Let's see what happens.
Of the student 1 object. So we're just going to click on play, and you'll be able to see that the student 1 name is printed. And if we have to print out the student 2 full name, we can just write student 2 over here and call this function again. And it's pretty easy. So what exactly is happening behind the scenes when we are calling this full name function? To understand that, what we can do is, let me actually remove this student2 dot full name, and let's actually write students dot full name.
Okay, no, I understand. and he's not passing nothing through the actual function. He's actually referring to the actual, because he set it equal to a value. So stu1 is actually referring to a specific student. For some reason, I didn't get that, or he just changed it. He just changed that, or is that always there? So that's actually a variable. Oh, snap. So that's why stu1.fullName. It's referring to the actual student. So when he calls it stu1.fullName, it automatically referencing the student, and it's going to, okay, I get it now. These are the objects inside of the actual class. Duh. So stu1 full name, that function is going to pretty much. So, okay, that's why he's saying stu1.fullName, because he's calling an actual function, but he's referencing a specific object within inside that class. So it has to be stu1.fullName. Nice.
Inside this, we are going to give the name of the instance that we want the full name of. So in our case, let's call it student1, and let's click on play, and you'll be able to see that both of these things, that is stu1.fullName and students.fullName, and then the name of the instance inside, gives us the same result. So what this turns into is this line, that student1.fullName function is actually turned into this thing over here. And what this line does is that it first goes to the students class, then it goes to the students class, and then it looks at the full name function that is over here, and then it passes the object or the instant of student1 to this self variable over here, and then it finds the first name and the last name and it prints it out. While in the case of this line, it first goes to this stu1 object and it sees in this line where is this stu1 object created, and it sees that the stu1 object is created inside the student class. So it goes inside the students class, and then it goes to the full name method over here, and then it prints out the first name and the last name.
Bam! Dad for understanding, baby. We understand. This dude's a good ass teacher. I'm trying to tell you, other YouTubers, you would be lost by now. Like, you would probably get out of the video. So I get what he's saying. He's saying it's different freaking ways to skin a cat, bro. You just don't skin a cat one way. It's different ways to skin a cat. He said you can write it this way, you can write it that way, bro. stu1.fullName is going to actually directly go to the variable inside of the function, and then you say .fullName is going to the actual method that's inside of the class. Or you can write students, which is the actual name of the class. .fullName is actually referencing a method, and then you write stu1, passing it through that actual method is going to pull out the actual variable, which is equal to a specific student. I like the second way better because I can get it more. It don't really, because the other stuff I learned in Python is like, I want to reference the class first. So class name dot, then what's the hierarchy, like, you know, what's in that class. I think of it like a jar. This is the freaking jar. It's a class. I open it up. I reach my hand inside the jar. I'm pulling out an actual student. So that's the way I just kind of understand it. So I like the second way better, but geez, the first way, man, it's pretty simple. All right, let's keep going.
So now we have a way of adding students inside a class, and we have already added two students, that is the Arthur student and the Johnny student, inside our class. Now what if we want to calculate the total number of students that are inside our class? So what we can do is, just like the function that we have created over here, we can also create variables inside our class. So what we can do is we can create a new variable over here and just call it number of students, and we can just give it the value of 0. And then what we can do is, just beneath this initialization method, we can just write students dot number of students plus equals to 1. So every time an object is created and the properties are initialized, this number of students is going to be increased by 1. And the way to access these number of students inside that is the number of students variable inside this class, is to make sure that you add the name of the class that you are referencing it to. So if there are multiple classes inside your code, then how is Python supposed to identify which class and which variable you are talking about? That is why it's really important to add the name of the class before the variable. So over here we are talking about the students class, and we are going to increase the number of students by 1. whenever we want to increase the number whenever a new student is added or a new instance or an object is added inside a class. So now we can just print out the number of students. So we have added the first student and the second student inside a class, and now if we print out the number of students, and how do we print out the number of students? We can just write students dot number of students, and let's print it out and see what are the number of students. So as you can see, it shows us 2. Now,
so see, this is something that I just like. It's like, all right, listen, bro. How do I know that students dot num underscore of underscore students plus is equal to 1? How do I know, like, how do I know that when I go and create another object with inside of this class, like I say STUL student 3, and I say equal students, and I say Aric Williams at aricwilliams@gmail.com, right? How do I know that the code understands to increase it by 1? And I guess that's just something that you got to run with. Python understands it because he clearly just printed the number of the students, and it's 2. So it's like, I don't really understand, like how specific things work, but I just have to understand, okay, freaking dude, this is how it works. That's it on that. So I'm trying to understand things so deeply. All right, let's play.
What if we copy cut this from over here and just add it just beneath this student 1 instance? So right now only one student, that is the Aric student, has been added to the class,
okay,
and the Johnny student has not been.
Freaking good. I want to cry. He's such a good teacher. The reason why we know, all right, what I just said is because of where you put that. Print the number of freaking students. All right, if right here is one student that you added and you said print it here, and you added no student below it, it's not going to pick it up because the way code reads, it stops from the top and reads line all the way down. This dude's a good teacher, man. If I can just give him some money. Well, yeah, let me see if he got a Udemy course, bro. I'll freaking buy that.
Added to the class yet. Therefore, the number of students should be just 1. So now if we play it over here, as you can see that there is only one student that is added inside our class. So this number of student variable that is declared inside our class is known as a class variable. So a lot of people make it very, very complicated as to what is a class variable and what is an instance variable. The difference is pretty simple. Whenever a variable is declared inside a class, it's known as a class variable. And whenever a variable is referencing an instance, is known as an instance variable. So all these variables over here that are referencing instance, for example, self.fname and last name and self.email, these 3 are known as instance variables because they affect the instances or the objects that we have created. But this number of students is actually a class level attribute. That is why this number of student is known as a class variable, and this function over here is known as a class function. So alright guys, this is pretty much it for this video. In this video we learned about object-oriented programming, what it is, we learned about classes, we learned about objects, and we learned about the class variables and the instance variables, and how do we print out stuff that is inside our class. So this is pretty much it for this video guys. I'll see you in the next video where we talk about...
I'm trying to tell you, man, subscribe to this freaking channel. I got subscribe, bell rung, build Python. So far, all right, so let me kick it back to you now, right? So that's what it's about. It's about understanding. So when we start talking about object-oriented programming, the first thing is, let me show you this so you understand what I'm doing. All right, so this is his YouTube channel, right? And he got 1, 2, 3, 4 about object-oriented programming. Objects and classes, inheritance and subclasses, whatever that is in classes, class methods, and whatever. So the next video is this video. So within the first video, understanding dealing with classes and objects, we write a class, and within that class it has different objects. So we pretty much learn what class and objects, the syntax it is for it, how to initialize it, right? What method to write. Okay, then we understand how to kind of manipulate that, right? Not necessarily manipulate it, but how do we like a sum function in Excel? What's the number? How many students do we have? Right? We understand how we do that, how to add to it. So shoot, man. Dude, this is awesome. I kind of like this. All right. So yeah, man, if y'all like this, let me know. All right. This is my new YouTube channel beginning. Right. Please put in the comments if I'm like not getting something or I'm getting it wrong, or if you understand it this way, or you want me to come back and understand it. I understand it. You don't understand it. You get in the comment section and get active. You know what I'm saying? Because it's my journey to learn, and it's also your journey to learn all this Python stuff, programming stuff. All right, so that's pretty much it, man.